What's going on, movie fans? My name is Michael Weir. I love talking about movies, and today I'm going to rank all 35 horror movies that I had a chance to see in 2023 from worst to best. Now, just like my previous ranked videos, this isn't just about my opinion. I would absolutely love to know how you would rank some of these movies. Maybe you saw some of them, maybe you saw all of them, or maybe you saw more than me. Whatever the case may be, let me know in the comment section down below. Let me know how you rank them, what your thoughts are on these movies, and if you agree or disagree with the things I'm about to say. And finally, if this is the first time you're finding my channel and you like this kind of content, whether it's ranked videos or movie talk, movie reviews, or even Blu-ray talk, I've got a ton of Blu-rays back there. I would love for you guys to check out my channel, maybe subscribe, and then check out the content that I'll be dropping in the next week, because last week I dropped the top 10 most surprising movies of 2023, the top 10 most disappointing movies of 2023, and in a couple of days I'll be dropping my top 10 best movies of the year, top 10 worst movies of the year, and then I'll be putting together a video where I tier list rank every movie I saw in 2023, and there are 100 of them, so that's going to be a big video on this channel too. So again, subscribe to get those notifications. But with all that out of the way, I do want to say one last thing before jumping into my ranked list of horror movies. There are 3 specific horror movies that I missed this year, and I just never found the time. The first one is Malum. Malum is only on Starz, like you had to subscribe to Starz to get it, or at least the last time you checked, so I never saw it. It was an intriguing plot, but I don't know where it would have ended on this ranked list. The second movie is called Monsters of California, and that movie is actually written and directed by Blink-182's Tom DeLonge, and I really wanted to check this movie out, but then my wife got me tickets to see Blink-182 next year, and so that weekend we'll actually be watching and reviewing that movie together, and then going to see Blink-182 in concert and doing like a whole big video of it. So I decided to savor the flavor for that movie till next year. And finally, the third and final movie that was on my horror list that I missed this year and never had a chance to see it is Pet Sematary Bloodlines, and this is a movie that I wasn't too interested in. I wasn't too worried about not catching it right away, but it was only exclusively on Paramount Plus for a long time, and I don't have Paramount Plus right now. But the main reason I wanted to actually check this movie out was because Lindsay Beer wrote and directed this movie, and she's going to write and direct the upcoming Paramount reboot of Sleepy Hollow. And if you guys know anything about me, I absolutely love the story of Sleepy Hollow, so I was curious what she was going to bring to that story and maybe kind of see what she was going to bring to Sleepy Hollow, but I never got a chance to see it. It's a movie that maybe down the line I will check out, but I never got a chance. But those are the only 3. Everything else on my list, like I said, I have 35 of them that I want to talk about here today. I did get a chance to see those, and I'm excited to talk about them with you guys. With all that said, let's rank 2023 horror movies from worst to best. Coming in at number 35, the worst of the bunch, and there's a good amount of movies here that are pretty bad, but the worst of the worst this year in horror has to be Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. And I don't feel bad for saying that. I know it's a low-budget horror movie, but there was little to no effort put into this movie. They found a bear mask and barely a pig mask, threw them on 2 dudes who looked just like redneck dudes. Like, if you didn't tell me this was a Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey movie, I'd have had no idea other than the opening montage, which talked about Christopher Robin. Like, if you cut out that opening montage, this is just a couple of redneck guys, find some masks, wear them, and kill people, and that's the movie. But no, this movie is Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey because they were able to get past the copyright laws because they expired, so they're able to use certain elements of Winnie the Pooh. And so I remember when I originally covered this right here on my channel, I was like, oh, this is an interesting concept. Like, this might be really good if it's done well. And then you find out that they put very little effort into the movie, and it just didn't work for me. Now, I will say this for the movie. I will give a positive to this movie. The opening scene where they talk about what happened with Christopher Robin, the opening animation, that's excellent. That's, if the rest of the movie had been that caliber, this would have been next level. Now, I know they worked with a limited budget, and I know they made more than their budget back, and now they are making Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey 2, and so maybe the next movie will be better. But for 2023, Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey is the worst of the bunch, so I'm throwing it at 35. At number 34, they tried to reboot this franchise yet again, and it's Children of the Corn. This is either the 12th or 13th movie in the franchise, And it should be fair to say that this series is dead. This franchise is done. They can't make a great Children of the Corn movie. I don't even think the original is very good. And I haven't seen many of the sequels. I will be honest about that. But I did sit down in the theater and I did watch this from beginning to end. And what a terrible movie. First of all, you just are supposed to understand that when the children decide to take over, they have all the adults. Like, they don't even go into detail of how they were able to round up all these adults on one night. They just automatically have all the adults in a cell. That's an issue for me because I want to see, like, you see the seeds start to be planted with these kids and taking over the town and not thinking the adults are doing the right thing. And then the next thing you know, all the adults are in jail cells or they're dead. And you're just like, well, how did you overpower everybody? That's one big gripe I have. But the other big gripe I have, and I know I've heard this from a lot of people, but the other huge gripe I have is you finally see he who walks behind the rows. And I'm still going to say this, I said it in every video I've talked about this, but it should be he who stalks. That's all I'm saying. But he who walks behind the rows is this gigantic corn cob looking ripoff of Groot. That's the best way I can put it. It's just this ripoff of Groot that is made out of corn, and his weakness is fire. I won't spoil the ending, but that's his weakness. Children of the Corn is just atrocious. I never want to watch another Children of the Corn movie. I hope they never try to reboot this franchise again. I hope it's just done and we can just leave it in the history of 2023 and move forward with other stuff. At number 33, we have A Haunting in Venice. Now, I know I told you guys in my top 10 worst of 2022 list that I would not be covering the Haunting in Venice movie because I was done covering these Agatha Christie adoptions. But I got hooked because they called it A Haunting in Venice and the trailer looked kind of spooky, and I'm a sucker for horror or horror adjacent, which is more of this movie, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna go see the movie. But I didn't have high hopes for it, and I was still let down. Like, okay, so just to give you guys an idea here, Murder on the Orient Express is a movie that came out in 2017, and I thought it was phenomenal. One of my favorite movies that year. I thought the cast was great in it. I loved the detective and his wittiness. It all worked for me. And then last year they dropped Death on the Nile, which was delayed for multiple reasons, but they dropped it last year. And they were on the Nile, and the Nile looked like PlayStation 2 graphics. It was bad. It was really bad. And the acting in it was bad. And then they gave a whole subplot to Poirot, the world's greatest detective. They gave a whole subplot to that guy's mustache. And then at the end of the movie, he shaves the mustache to kind of show that he's grown as a person. So getting into this third movie, when it opens, he's retired and he's got his mustache back. And I'm like, well, he found his love for detective work again in the last movie and shaved his mustache. But now they're going another direction. He's got the mustache back. So that was a little annoying right off the bat. But then you get into the heart of this movie where there's a murder that occurs, and so he's got to interrogate everyone, and he keeps calling himself the world's greatest detective, but all he does is interrogate people and accuse them of murder until he moves on to the next suspect. He's just like, I know you did it, and here's how I can prove it, and then he goes through this whole string of how he knows they did it, and then it's not them, and he moves on to the next person. And the other thing that bothered me in this movie is that it does these weird close-ups of people's faces throughout the entire movie when they're giving their backstory. Not just like, oh, this one character gave him a close-up, he's having this moment. No. It gives you like a full 10 minutes on every character's face as they give a backstory for themselves. I don't know why they chose to do it this way. It's a really weird way to film a movie, and ultimately, this movie deserves to be toward the bottom of the horror movies in 2023. At number 32, we have the religious movie Nefarious. Now, I covered Nefarious on my channel and had quite a few people tell me all of the reasons that I'm evil, and that's messed up. It's a movie. First of all, can we just take a movie for what it is? But if we want to look at the movie itself and we want to find out why did it rank at number 32 on my list out of 35 horror movies this year, well, first of all, you sold me a movie about possession. From the trailers, it looked like a possession movie. I was like, all right, I'm into it. We got a couple of those coming out this year. Maybe it'll be one of the better ones. I went in to sit down and watch it, and essentially what you have is a demon and an atheist having an hour-and-a-half long conversation with each other. Maybe longer. I'm not even sure the runtime of this movie. But they're having a conversation with each other, and essentially in this movie the demon has the high ground to the atheist. Like, because the demon knows God exists, he's better than the atheist. And just the people that made this movie throwing that message out to the world, like, what are you doing? Why would you say, oh, well, the demon is better than the human being? No, okay? It's not how that works at all, but that's what they portray in this movie. And then they go through every hot button topic throughout this entire movie. They cover abortion, they cover gender, they cover everything that is a hot button topic throughout this movie. And the demon explains why it's a demonic thing that they kind of created, but he loved to see how the humans ran with it. And then the atheist makes it all the way to the fucking Glenn Beck show. And at that point of the movie, I was like, man, I wish they would have just shown Glenn Beck in the first 5 minutes so I could have walked out. I didn't realize that he was going to be in this movie. I really don't want to support anything that guy has anything to do with. But here we are. I watched Nefarious. It's one of the worst this year. And if you don't like that, it's not that I need Jesus in the comments. It's that you need to find a new hobby. With that said, though, let's move on to the next one. At number 31, I know that film Twitter is going to be really upset about this, but it is Skinamarink. Now listen. Hear me out at least. When I started this year, I went and saw Skinamarink in the theater. I stayed there for 40 minutes with my wife, and then we both were like, let's get the hell out of here. Along with pretty much the rest of the theater. I think when we left, there were 3 people left. But we left. And then I made a video called Why I Walked Out of Skinamarink, and I was an asshole in that video. I'm going to own that. I was an asshole in that video. It's still up on my channel if you want to watch it. But I didn't want, after I filmed that video, I put it out there and like a month or 2 passed and I had time to think about it. I was like, that's not how I want to be represented on my channel. And so it took me a while, because it was just a week or so ago that I actually made this, but I sat down and I watched Skinamarink in my house, and I did a full review for it. It's on my channel if you want to check out my full thoughts on Skinamarink. But I will say this about the movie. I still don't believe that the fuzziness that's on the screen and the still shots of doorways and the fuzziness coming through the speakers is a good way to consume a movie. And that's why it's so low on this list, because I did watch it in my house. I did get creeped out while watching this movie, watching the full movie in the comfort of my own home, in the dark down here. I was like, actually, that is kind of terrifying. Like, the filmmaker has a gift. So I want to give praise where it's due and say that what he was going for worked for me. And I admit that now because I actually gave it a fair chance. But it's still not an enjoyable way to watch a movie. I hope the director goes on and makes a great horror movie down the line. But this one just isn't it for me. Ultimately, I would love to really enjoy Skinamarink, but there's nothing that's ever going to draw me back to watch that movie again with all the fuzziness, with all the haziness. It's not an enjoyable way to consume entertainment, and that's what movies are. They're entertainment. I expect to be entertained, not to sit there irritated that I'm wasting another hour and 40 minutes. So that's why it's this low on the list. I do understand what the director was going for, so don't kill me for putting it this low, but understand my reasoning for putting it this low is just an entertainment value. There's not much to be had, in my opinion. We've cracked the top 30, guys, and at number 30 we have Consecration. Consecration is a movie that came out in February of this year. You probably haven't heard of it, and if you have, you probably haven't watched it, but it's a movie about a woman who's being stalked by some sort of eerie presence at the beginning, and that's the only part of the movie that really worked for me. After that, you find out that her brother is a priest. He's been living at this convent, and then he was murdered, or he died of mysterious circumstances. So she goes to collect his things and also to kind of check in and investigate and find out what happened to her brother. Well, while all that's going down, this presence is getting darker and darker, and by the end of the movie, when they reveal what that presence is, it's kind of lackluster. And then they show something at the very end of the movie that was happening at the very beginning of the movie, and that reveal just didn't work for me at all. Overall, it wasn't a movie that I even remembered I saw most of the year. I'd have to look in my list of movies and be like, oh yeah, that's right, Consecration. What was that about again? And that's how the movie is. Like, you'll watch it once, and then you'll probably forget you ever watched it. At number 29 is a spin on a classic movie, It's a Wonderful Knife. And this is in the same vein as movies like Freaky, which looked at spinning Freaky Friday into a slasher, or Happy Death Day, which spun those different like Groundhog's Day into a slasher. Or even more recently, you've got Totally Killer, which will be on this list later, which spins Back to the Future into a slasher. So It's a Wonderful Knife is a play on the movie It's a Wonderful Life, and spins that into a slasher. And it's actually got a really interesting concept. And I said this in the review, and I'll say it here again. It's a great concept. horrible execution. So the concept of this movie is you have a girl who saves the life of a bunch of her friends from a serial killer played by Justin Long, and that's not spoiling anything. That's not only in the trailer, but it's in the first 10 minutes of the movie. She stops the serial killer, and then a year later, her life is pretty bad. And it doesn't explain why or give a reason for why everyone around her has sort of become dicks, even though she saved the life of her brother and so many other people that night. But whatever. She's treated horribly, so she looks to the sky and says she wishes she had never been born. And then she gets her wish granted. So it's like It's a Wonderful Life, where now she has to live her life as someone who was never born, so she has to see the repercussions of her actions of never being born. It's a great story in It's a Wonderful Life. And again, with that concept, I was like, ooh, you turn that into a slasher, not a bad idea. Now the serial killer's going to be on the loose, right? Right? It's going to be the same serial killer, right? It's not going to be like her dad is now a zombie that works for the serial killer, right? We're not going to go... That's exactly what happens. God damn it. And that's what happens in this movie, is they just go all crazy in the third act of this movie, where now the town is under mind control from that serial killer. What started as this serial killer going on a rampage because he was trying to take over more of a business is now this weird mind control. He has supernatural powers over people. And really, for me, it's the execution of this movie where the ball is just dropped. Great concept, great opening act, and you get to the execution in the last act and it just falls apart completely. Unfortunately, It's a Wonderful Knife is 29. At number 29, guys, we have The Blackening, and The Blackening is a movie that I actually saw as a double feature with the movie No Hard Feelings this year. And that was an even worse movie that we'll get to in another video at another time. But today we're talking about The Blackening. The Blackening is a movie about a group of black friends who go to a cabin in the woods on Juneteenth weekend to celebrate Juneteenth. And right off the bat, I have to say that I understand that this movie wasn't necessarily made for me. While all movies are technically made for everyone, the jokes in this, I knew I wasn't going to be in on all of the different jokes and the different things that they were getting at, because it's just a difference of culture. And so just trying to understand and respect the culture while watching the movie, it was one of those things where it's like, oh, okay, people around me are laughing. I didn't necessarily get the joke. But that happened to me in Blue Beetle as well this year. It's like there's a lot of cultural references made, and I may not be in on the joke, and that's fine. But why I rank this movie so low is just the premise of the movie is, so you've got these group of people that go to this cabin in the woods. They're trying to celebrate Juneteenth, and then a serial killer is among them. And I won't say more than that, but it's just a really disappointing reveal. And it's a really disappointing reveal as to why this individual is upset with the rest of the group and is killing them off one by one. I don't know. For me, when I got to the end of the movie, I was walking out and this dude was like, hey man, what'd you think of the movie? And I was like, it was all right. And he goes, yeah, right? It was all right. And I was like, yeah, it was all right. He's like, yeah, me too. And we walked out. Like, that was it. So it's not necessarily a bad movie. It's just a movie that didn't really work for me personally, and it wasn't really aimed toward me, and that's totally fine. So with that said, it's 28. At number 27, guys, we have The Nun 2. And The Nun 2 is a movie that I talked about on my most disappointing movies of the year list. And I'm going to say the same thing here. You've got the nun. You've got this great character in Valak, the demon nun, and you showed me all the great parts in the trailers. So by the time I got to the theater, 3 months after the trailer had come out and been playing before every single movie in the theater, when you get to the theater and you sit down and you watch the movie and you're like, oh, I remember this from the trailer, and I remember that from the trailer, and I remember that from the trailer. Is there going to be anything new in this? No, there's not going to be anything new. Okay. All right, so that was a big issue I had, was that there was nothing new in the movie from the trailers. But the other issue I had was there were several characters in this movie you could have cut out completely, saved a little bit of runtime, tightened up the story a bit, and made it a better story. But unfortunately, you just have the second movie in a row with the nun where there is a certain trinket, a certain artifact that can defeat the nun, and the nun's on the way to get it, and the people are on the way to get it, and they're gonna come to a head at a certain point. And while the nun has all this extra power, the people have the power of faith. And that's the second movie in a row we've done that with the nun. It just didn't make for a very entertaining movie. At number 26, guys, we have Dear David. And Dear David is a movie about evil going viral. And that has always been an issue for me in horror movies. I'm not a huge fan of when that's where they go with the plot. But I gave this movie a shot for two reasons. First of all, the movie wasn't just going to go that direction. It was based on going viral. And I was like, that's different. Most of the time horror saves that till the end, and then they're just like, and now it's viral. But it was cool seeing this like starting out that way. And the other reason I went and saw this is because Justin Long was in it, and in Justin Long we trust. So I went to go see Justin Long in this movie. Really was my main reason for seeing this. And I will say, to give him credit, anytime Justin Lon's on the screen of this movie, it's elevated to the next level. He is the energy in this movie. The fact that the main character of this movie, the one that conjures up the Dear David spirit on the internet, he gets antagonized by this spirit throughout the movie, is so boring and just not somebody you want to watch for an hour and a half in a horror movie. And you've got this great star in Justin Long that you use sparingly in little 5-minute increments throughout the movie. And it's just like, why are you doing, like, clearly when he's there to play, but you got just main stars who's just got no energy. So the energy issue is a big issue I have for this movie, because your main star didn't have what Justin Long had, and it's just like, why didn't you get Justin Long for the whole thing? But when you get into the rest of this movie, again, it is evil going viral, and it's a poltergeist movie at the same time, so you have a little bit of poltergeist in there, you have a little bit of this viral sensation going on, and then the movie claims the entire time to be a true story. So for all of those reasons, it's number 26. At number 25, guys, we have She Came from the Woods. And I gotta be honest, anytime you have a slasher set in the 80s at a camp, I'm automatically in. Like, you could tell me that it's gonna be the worst movie of the year, and I'm still gonna go check it out. And I remember being excited to see this, and then it was released on Tubi. Now, for those of you who don't know, Tubi is the absolute worst way to watch a movie ever. It does not matter to me that it's free, because there are 1,000 ads for laundry detergent. Like, by the end of the movie, you're thinking about laundry detergent more than you are thinking about the movie. And that's the advertiser's goal. But for me, the viewer, my goal was to watch a movie, not 1,000 laundry detergent ads. But unfortunately, that's what you got here. With that said, I will say that I thought that the camp slasher aspect was cool, and there were a few really cool moments with the camera angles that they did. There's a moment where all these kids are on a bus, and the guy trying to like look at the under the hood of the bus, he leans down, and when he comes back up and looks, all the kids are gone. It's just a really cool camera trick they do. And there's another moment also with kids where they're circled around, they're sort of chanting, and this witch rises up from the grave. It's a really cool scene as well. Those two scenes aside, the rest of this movie is not done very well. First of all, way too long of a movie. And second, it's very convoluted on exactly how they're rising this witch from the grave, because they've got a couple different storylines going on, one with the kids, one with teenagers, and then you got something happened with the adults, and they all know. By the end of the movie, I was confused, and I was the one sitting there watching it. She Came from the Woods. I know it's a lower budget movie, so I'm not trying to hate on it too much, but just from a story standpoint, like, they should have gone with one less angle for this witch, like at least one less, if not two less, and just sort of focused on one group bringing back this witch and then the witch causing havoc at the campground. Would have been a better movie. At number 24, guys, we have R.L. Stine's Zombie Town. This is a movie I actually just checked out a week or so ago with my kids. It's fine. It's got Chevy Chase in it. It's got Dan Aykroyd in it, but they can't even save this movie. This movie is, it's like Goosebumps if Goosebumps was bad. And I know it's R.L. Stine, so that's why I'm jumping to Goosebumps. But that's what this feels like. It just feels like if Goosebumps was bad, that's what this would be. There's not many redeeming qualities in this movie. For kids, you don't have many slapstick moments, and that's what kids are looking for in horror movies. Well, my kids. And then you've got, on the adult side, the zombies just sort of surround people and like that's all they do. They don't bite them. They're not like gnashing teeth. Like, there's not anything scary about them. So I'm not sure who this movie's really marketed to. Is it marketed toward kids or is it marketed toward adults? Because there's not really anything there for either of them. There's just this zombie movie where there's a way to reverse the zombiness. I don't know. Overall, I watched this movie because I'm going to give anything R.L. Stine a chance. I'm a huge Goosebumps fan, but this movie wasn't it for me. And now it's time for a quick break for Red Bull. I was trying to wait till number 20, but I just need it now and thought I'd let you guys know. So, Red Bull. Yeah, it's needed tonight. It's like 9 o'clock where I'm at right now. It's getting late for me. I'm 33. Past 9 o'clock, it's late. At number 23, we have the Netflix released movie, The Pale Blue Eye, and this is actually the first movie that I did a review for here on this channel in 2023, and it stars Christian Bale as a detective who is looking into some ritualistic killings that are happening on or near this campus of like a boys' school, cadet school is the best way I can put it. Anyway, with all that going on, you also have Edgar Allan Poe thrown into the mix here. And Edgar Allan Poe is played by a guy who just, maybe this is how Edgar Allan Poe talked, but it's not how I ever expected him to talk. And he's just like this the whole time. Well, I have this southern accent and this is how I speak. And I'm very soft-spoken, but I write this horror novel. And it's like, what? Like, that is not how I expected Edgar Allan Poe to be. Maybe he was like that. He's got like this southern drawl the whole time. That didn't work for me. And the movie overall is fine, but like most Netflix movies, it's a one watch that I'll never go back to. At number 22 is Cobweb. Now, Cobweb is a movie that the people on Twitter loved. Horror Twitter was like obsessed with Cobweb for a month. And when it came out, it actually came out the same weekend as Barbenheimer, and so it wasn't playing near my house. And I tried to get tickets to it, and I couldn't find time for it. When it finally went to streaming, I bought it on Amazon. I was like, okay, my wife and I are going to sit there, we're going to watch this horror movie. And I will say, the first 2 acts, great setup for a movie. And I loved seeing Anthony Starr in this movie. That's the guy who plays Homelander in The Boys. And I loved seeing the girl, I don't know her name, but she plays Janice Ian in Mean Girls, getting some work again. That was cool. So he had a good cast, had a great setup for a horror movie. And you get to that last act, and it turned into like horror and action combined. They found a way to like have all these bullies break into this kid's house just at the time that this entity is coming out of the wall, so they're able to like show you how evil and gruesome this entity can be. But overall, for all the mystery and intrigue set up in the first 2 acts, when you finally get to the 3rd act, I was like, what is everybody talking about? Like, I'm convinced that a lot of people who talk about how great some horror movies are on Twitter have only watched the first like 20 minutes. And then when you get into the rest of the movie, they're just like, oh yeah, no, I fell asleep, but it's a great movie. Yeah, you should definitely check it out. Everybody should watch this movie. And listen, I'm all for championing horror movies that are great, but this movie for me just fell apart in the last act, and I don't see anybody talking about that. That's just me. Maybe it's just my opinion. That's what we're doing here is my opinions, so we'll move on. At number 21, guys, we have Don't Look Away. Don't Look Away is a movie about a possessed mannequin. And here's the thing. I think that this movie could have worked if the mannequin wasn't this naked, smiling mannequin. Like, the idea of this movie is cool, where if you look away from this thing, it will move and get closer to you until it kills you. And it's shot on a super low budget, so you don't get to see most of the deaths that happen in this movie, which I understand. I'm not trying to knock a movie with a low budget. Listen, you go into a low budget horror movie, you get what you get. So I try to like hope that the story is going to be great. And I will say that the idea of the mannequin sort of being possessed and going around and killing people is a cool idea. But the movie does 2 things. First of all, we already talked about the mannequin, so I'll just jump on that real quick. Had they had something scarier than the mannequin, this movie really could have moved up a couple notches for me. The fact that it's this weird naked smiling mannequin just didn't work for me. The second thing about this movie, though, that is just out of left field, makes no sense as to why they did it, is they give one of the characters in this movie this Jack from The Shining arc. Like, he goes all the way into writing that all work and no play makes him a dull boy. And I was like, what are we doing here? Because there's no reason for this guy to go from normal, average, sort of a shitty boyfriend to Jack from The Shining. But maybe the director's paying homage, and I completely understand paying homage, but you get into this movie and it's like, no, you're literally being Jack from The Shining for no reason. Like, there's no build-up for that. This mannequin isn't doing any head games with other people, but this guy is like going on a Jack from The Shining trip while there's a whole nother movie happening over here. And there's even something to be said where you could explore that. Like, you could look into that guy sort of having a Jack from The Shining moment in a different movie completely. But this was like the writer had 2 different ideas and he sort of mashed them together, and you end up getting a naked smiling mannequin, and the other guy is just having this weird Jack from The Shining trip, and the 2 don't mix. We've cracked the top 20, and at number 20, we have It Lives Inside. And this is a horror movie that represents sort of Indian culture horror, and I thought that was kind of different. It was new, it was unique, and I was excited to see this movie. Saw this movie, and I will say that for the first 2 acts of this movie, it's pretty scary. It does a good job doing what it's supposed to do, where it leaves you sort of on edge, wondering where the theme's going to be next. Because whatever this entity is, it's invisible, and it's like throwing people around, and every once in a while, it'll reveal a little of itself to sort of jump scare the viewer. But that worked for me. You get into the 3rd act, and they actually show the theme in full form, and that might be how it looks in Indian lore. But for me, watching it, once I saw it, I was like, oh, well, that's not scary at all. And now whatever scariness you've built up, whatever tension you've built up for me, the viewer, once I see it, I'm like, oh, well, I'm not scared of that at all. I don't know, it just kind of fizzled out. And that's how this movie was. It had a good build up to it, and then by the end, it just sort of fizzled out. And I was like, oh, well, that was a horror movie. Let's get out of here. So that's kind of how I felt. At number 19, we have a Hulu released movie called No One Will Save You. This is another movie I saw online, people talking about how great it was, how incredible it was. And I didn't realize this was a movie with zero dialogue until I went and saw the movie. And then I realized, I was like, oh, this is going to be a no dialogue movie. And here's the thing. If you have a movie like A Quiet Place where there's no dialogue and the reason for that is because the aliens can hear you, I completely get it. And you're able to use the emotion and bounce that emotion off of different characters in the house from A Quiet Place. I bring up A Quiet Place because in this movie, you have a girl who lives alone in a house. And so she's supposed to portray all of these emotions that you would usually do in a movie through speaking, but she doesn't speak. So all of the emotion is just portrayed through her body language. But when you only have one person to use that body language from, it doesn't work as well as when you have several people to bounce that body language off of. At least that's my opinion. So I get what they were going for in this movie. If you watch it and you see kind of what this girl's gone through in her life and why no one talks to her, and why she stays silent in her life, it kind of makes sense. But then when you see the movie, it just doesn't play out the way I think the director wanted it to play out, because you have a girl who's just trying to portray all of this emotion to you without speaking words, and you're just like, there's you and the aliens, so I'm going to need somebody to say something sooner or later so I can understand what the hell is going on. But to give praise where it's due, 100% the aliens were awesome. They would send an alien in to sort of take over, and then she would kill it, and another alien would come, and this time it's creepier. And it would get creepier and creepier and creepier or bigger, and it just worked. Every time a new alien would show up to her house to sort of try to take over her body, she would kill it, and they'd have to send the next big bad in. And they just keep doing this over and over throughout the movie, and that was a cool part of the movie. But for the most part, for me in this movie, I didn't attach to it on the emotional level that a lot of people said that they did. At number 18 is a misfire from M. Night Shyamalan, which is like saying water is wet, because the guy has a hit and then a miss. And so we were due for a miss. So here we are at Knock at the Cabin. Knock at the Cabin, I hear the ending of the book is different than the ending that M. Night Shyamalan did, which is crazy because there is no twist to this movie. So if you go into this movie, it's an M. Night Shyamalan movie, you're expecting a twist, and then he's like, oh yeah, the twist this time around is that there's no twist. This is what it seems like, because you have this plot that's revealed to you at the very beginning of the movie. You have Rupert Grint, Dave Bautista, they show up with two other people, and they're like, this is what's going to happen. You have to sacrifice one of the people in this house. We can't kill you, but you have to sacrifice them in order to prevent the end of the world from happening. And then they start showing these horrible events that are happening all around the world, like a tsunami, airplanes falling out of the sky, things like that. And it gives you the idea, like the idea is planted in your head, the viewer, that maybe they pre-recorded all this. Maybe all of this is from different times, and that these four people aren't actually sent by God. They're just crazy people. And so you're hoping that the couple and the kid, they can get out of this house and they can get out of there and they can get to safety. But at the same time, you're thinking, what if they're telling the truth? So you're wondering what the twist reveal is going to be toward the end of this movie. And then there isn't one. It's just as straightforward as it was explained to you at the beginning of the movie. That's what ends up happening at the end of the movie. And it's like, kind of feel like I wasted my time here. So again, if the book has a better ending, I don't know. But that's what I've heard online. For me, Knock at the Cabin is just a misfire by M. Night Shyamalan. Number 17 is another movie that I had on my most anticipated movies of the year 2023 list, and that's too bad. Sometimes I have them on high on my list, and I'm excited about them, and then this is what we get. But number 17 is The Last Voyage of the Demeter, and this is a movie about Dracula taking his final voyage from Transylvania all the way to England. And while he's on that boat, he's going to feed on people to sort of stay alive. So it's a cool concept, but then the people don't know what they're dealing with. But eventually in the movie, the people catch on that Dracula is hiding in one of the coffins below deck. And they're like, hey, instead of going to get him in the sunlight where we could kill him, let's wait till nighttime when he's most powerful, and we'll see if we can catch him there. And then they do this over and over and over each day. Like each night he comes out, he messes a bunch of people up, and then he just goes back and he sleeps. And they're like, all right, we'll get him the next night, guys. We'll get him this time. And then he messes people up again. And so that's kind of annoying to watch as a viewer. You're just like, go down down there and get him. And I understand you could say, oh, well, they wouldn't know exactly how to handle Dracula, but one of his brides is on board and she's working with them. She'd know a little bit. She'd know something. But instead, they're just like, no, let's wait till nighttime. This will work out. This will work out. And then the movie does something egregious at the end where they could have ended it with a nice bow on it, and they decide to go with the sequel route. And they're like, now, this guy is a survivor from the ship, and he is going to make it his life's mission to track down Dracula. And it was just like, what are we doing here? Why do we need this? You're not going to get a sequel, so why put this in? At number 16, guys, we have Evil Dead Rise. Evil Dead Rise is a movie that I have said many times on the channel now, but I will say it one more time here, and that is that this is Convenience the Movie. This is a movie where every little scenario is just convenient enough to move the plot along. Like, conveniently, there's a family living in a building that's being condemned, and there's just a couple of tenants left. And then conveniently, an earthquake hits that building, seemingly doesn't disturb anything else, just that building, and conveniently this concrete barrier in the basement is broken up, and so conveniently the kids go down there and find records, and conveniently those have the words on them that rise the dead, and conveniently one of the kids in the household has a record player because he's an aspiring DJ, and so when he plays them, the Evil Dead rise. And then conveniently there's a work truck in a garage with a chainsaw, and then the main character has to use that chainsaw to take out what looks like something straight out of a Resident Evil game. Like, that's what the monster sort of morphs into at the end, is something out of a Resident Evil game. And I was so disappointed by this movie. I thought it had all kinds of potential, taking the Evil Dead from the woods somewhere new. I was like, this could be something new, could be something awesome, and it was just disappointing. I want to see Evil Dead get back to the woods, go back to that grittiness of 2013. That's what I want to see. At number 15, guys, right in the middle of the pack here, we have The Exorcist Believer. And I think this is a good place for it on this list because it was just fine. As far as this movie goes, you have David Gordon Green, who did the Halloween trilogy, coming back to direct this movie for Blumhouse. And I was already kind of shaky on that because I wasn't a huge fan of that trilogy. I thought he did great in Halloween 2018. But then after that, I wasn't a big fan. So I was kind of worried where we were going with this movie. But ultimately, it was decent enough. It was fine. You had the religious Avengers come together, is what I like to call them. You've got a priest and a pastor and then a voodoo lady and another sort of religious person, and they all kind of come together to take on this demon themselves. And I'd never seen anything like that in a movie before. I haven't seen every exorcism movie, so maybe that's something that's happened in other movies, but for me, this was sort of a first, and I liked that. The best story I have to take away from The Exorcist Believer is that I went there with my wife to a theater in Indy, and then right after that, we did Hannah Haunted Acres in Indy, and it was really fun. They have like 6 or 7 haunted houses, and we got to go through all of them, and it's a really fun place. I had a good, enjoyable time. So for me, Exorcist Believer is tied to that night. That might be another reason why the experience of that movie sort of puts it a little higher on this list than some of the other movies I've already talked about. At number 14, we have The Haunted Mansion. And it's a movie that my kids really enjoyed. My son got jump scared, I think, for the first time in his life in this movie. It's sort of a gateway horror movie, and so I kind of like movies like that for my kids. So my wife and I, we packed up the kids, we went to the theater to see this movie, and it's enjoyable enough. I did call right away that Owen Wilson wasn't actually a priest, and I was like, he's some sort of a crook, like, he did something, and now he's in this position where he can't leave the house. And then that's exactly what ended up happening. But I thought overall the whole movie was fun. It was a good cast. Jamie Lee Curtis as the crystal ball. That was cool too. Madame Leota. Like, it was just cool seeing those characters come to life again. And I'm a huge fan of the Eddie Murphy Haunted Mansion movie. It's a movie that I watch with my kids every year. And again, this is kind of like gateway horror. You kind of get them to enjoy this. And then in a couple years, it's like, now do you guys want to watch Scream? Couple years, I promise. It won't be before they're 13. It might be. You get the idea, though. I was excited to show them this. They had a good time with it, and I had a good time as a parent just with my kids in the theater that day. At number 13, guys, we have Five Nights at Freddy's. Now, admittedly, I'm not the biggest Five Nights at Freddy's fan. I've never played the game. I played it like a little, but it's so little that like I just claim to have never played it. So I didn't really have any knowledge or hype going into this movie, and it was fine. I really enjoyed the performance out of Matthew Lillard, and I hope that he's in more things. It's every time I see him in something, I'm like, yes, come back. be in more movies. Matthew Lillard is a treasure, and we need him in more stuff. So it's cool to see him in this movie. Overall, I thought it was fine. They're gonna have to do some explaining about how that bear was able to just like transport to that house, but it's a horror movie. You don't get all the answers right away. Overall, I know a lot of people enjoyed this movie, and it was what people were looking for out of a video game movie. And so I will just say that for me personally, this movie was fine, and I do look forward to Five Nights at Freddy's 2, whatever they're going to call that movie. At number 12, guys, we have Megan, and Megan is a movie that came out in January of 2023, and it's actually one of the first packed crowds I had been in almost 2 years. Like, since the pandemic in 21 and 22, there were very few movies that actually had more than 15, 20 people in them, but I walked into the theater for Megan, and it was a full house, and it's just kind of cool seeing horror movies getting that sort of attention in January where you get a full house of people. And while I know a lot of people, including myself, had wished it had been hard R and they had gone really gory with the blood in this movie, I understand why Blumhouse said, all right, we're going to make this PG-13 so you can bring the whole family, because that's what was there. There were a lot of families at the Megan showing that I went to. As far as the movie goes itself, it was fun watching her sort of figure out that she was AI and that humans are humans, but she could be better than them and she knew what was right for them. So she starts murdering people, and that dog, he got what was coming to him. I enjoyed the movie overall. I had a fun time watching Megan, and it's a movie that I'm really looking forward to, Megan 2.0 or whatever they decide to call that movie. At number 11, guys, is the only movie that I saw in theaters with my boss. Yeah, that's right. Do you get to go see movies with your boss? Probably not. But I went and saw a movie with my boss this year, and it was The Pope's Exorcist. And this was a movie that, before The Exorcist Believer, was the first time that I'd ever seen one demon in a movie possess two people at the same time. And I thought that was really unique and new. And like I said earlier when I talked about The Exorcist Believer, is I have not seen every exorcism movie. Maybe that's a trope that's already happened, just like The Religious Avengers. But it was the first time I had personally seen it in a movie. I thought that was a cool trope to have. I thought that was kind of neat. But I also really enjoyed Russell Crowe's performance in this movie. I thought he elevated this movie to much higher than it really needed to be. You get into this movie, it's your standard exorcism movie. Family moves into a place that was given to them. The kid gets possessed. They have to call in the exorcist. Well, the exorcist who comes in is played by Russell Crowe, and he does such a good job that I would love to see him in another movie where he's playing this character again. All right, guys, made it to the top 10. Now, these are the 10 horror movies that I believe are the best, and in this order in 2023. But like I said at the beginning of the video, if you think differently, I'd love to know in the comment section down below. Let me know how you would rank these movies. If you've seen any of the movies on this list, let me know what you think about them and where we agree or disagree. With that said, at number 10, I have Insidious: The Red Door. And I know a lot of people have said there's not much new to this movie, doesn't really do anything new to the franchise, but I wholeheartedly disagree. First of all, you have Patrick Wilson, who's directing this movie and starring in it, and it's almost like he heard the fans and he cut out the loud noise boom that's in the first couple of Insidious movies every time there's a jump scare. I really appreciated that. There's also building in this movie, building toward the horror that you could feel. And what I mean by that is there's a moment in this movie where Patrick Wilson's character is at a funeral, and as he's sitting in the car, you see someone creeping up on his car, slowly in the background, slowly in the background, slowly in the background, and then as he pulls away, it's gone. And it's just moments like that where they sort of build the horror, they build the tension. And there are quite a few jump scares in this movie, but I think they are well placed. I think overall, this movie did a great job answering questions for people too, because if you watch those first two Insidious movies, you have this father and son who are being possessed by these different things because they're astral projecting their bodies, trying to save each other. You have the dad gets possessed at one point in these movies, and the whole first movie and the second movie are very closely intertwined. And so when you watch these movies, there's a lot of questions you have. And now I believe that if you watch part 1, part 2, and then The Red Door, all of those answers will be given to you. And I appreciate when a movie can do that, because especially with 3 being a prequel and then 4 being almost a separate story completely, I really liked how part 1 and part 2 connect directly to now part 5 and really cap off that story for this family. And the movie worked for me. So I really enjoyed Insidious: The Red Door. I recommend you check it out, and that's why it's number 10. At number 9 is another movie that felt fresh and new this year, and that is The Boogeyman. Now, I know there have been several Boogeymans before, but this movie had nothing to do with any of them. This Boogeyman movie creeped me out. They did a great job playing with darkness in this movie of where this boogeyman was going to be. And it does have the creature feature problem that I talked about earlier, that once the creature is revealed, you have less of a horror sensation now because you know what it looks like. And usually in horror monster movies, when the creature gets revealed, it's just like, oh, all right. Well, that's what I was scared of this whole time. Not as scary because your imagination can actually work a lot better for you than what they have to show you on the screen most of the time. And so when you finally do get to the monster reveal in the boogeyman, it is a little bit of like, all right, well, the horror sensation has fizzled out a bit, but I think the movie does a good job carrying itself through the end of this movie, and that's why I made it number 9. At number 8, guys, don't say Hollywood has 0 brand new ideas and that everything's a sequel, because this movie is called Infinity Pool, and it felt very fresh, very new. It was directed by Brandon Cronenberg, and it's a movie about this island that people go to a resort on to have a good time on. But if you leave the resort and you commit any sort of crime, the crime is usually punished by death, and you can pay, as long as you have the money, you can pay to have them create a clone of you that will take your place, and then that clone will die. And so during this movie, the main character of this movie is sort of struggling with the fact that, is he the one dying? Is it the clone that's dying? Like, who's actually the one dying? Is he the original? And that's a cool concept in and of itself. But then you've got Mia Goth in this movie, and anything she's in, it just elevates that horror to the next level, and that's what this did. Now, Infinity Pool was much higher on my list, but I did just rewatch it last week, sort of figure out where I wanted to put it in my rankings, and it lost a lot of rewatchability. Like, the first time I watched it, I was pretty engulfed in like the whole plot and what was going on, but once you sort of understand it, it lost a lot of its rewatchability. And so while I still have it in my top 10, it's at number 8 because I do think that rewatchability factor really dropped down quite a bit. But it's still a decent movie and one I recommend. At number 7, guys, the movie we briefly touched on a little bit earlier, and that is Totally Killer. And this is one where it's spinning the classic again. You've got Back to the Future with a slasher twist, and it's called Totally Killer. The movie is about a teenage girl whose mother is killed on Halloween night by a serial killer that was a serial killer like 30 years previously and got away with it back then. Now he's back and he kills her mom. And so she finds a way to go back in time to stop the killer back when her mother was a teenager. When she goes back in time, this movie takes it to the next level. This movie becomes such a great movie. Every interaction she has with adults back then is hilarious, but then when she is having interactions with kids or teenagers or even her own mother as a teenager, those interactions are great too. I think this movie fires on all cylinders when she's in the 80s. And I think there's a little bit you could say about the time travel aspect. But when you think about it, you could say that about any time travel movie. Like, they're just going to throw a bunch of scientific stuff at you until you're finally just like, all right, I get it. They traveled in time. But what are you doing in time? This movie does stuff in time that keeps you engaged, to the point where I actually watched this movie in a hotel room, and I watched the first 40 minutes and I had to cut it off, and I called my wife and I was like, hey, there's a movie on Amazon Prime. I'm going to wait for you on. I thought it wasn't going to be good, so I started watching it. It's actually great. I watched 40 minutes of it, but I'm going to stop now. I'm going to come home and we're going to watch it. And so when I got done with my work trip and I got home, we sat down, we watched it together, and we both really enjoyed it. Totally Killer is number 7. At number 6, guys, we have the movie Sick. Sick was released directly to streaming this year, and it is a movie that takes place right at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the movie's written by Kevin Williamson, who wrote several of the Scream films, and so you've got that style of writing going on, and you've got the COVID-19 pandemic. And for whatever reason, the movie really worked for me. I've gone back and watched the movie twice since the original time that I watched it, and I enjoy it more each time that I watch it. I also like the killer reveal in this movie because it's a movie about COVID-19 pandemic is happening, people are quarantining, staying in place, and these girls are going to their family's cabin to sort of quarantine, stay in place, and they've got all of the COVID masks and procedures in place at the cabin with each other, and then of course a friend shows up, and then another friend shows up, and they're like, guys, we're breaking quarantine problems, but then a killer shows up, and they're like, could be any of us, and I really like that about this movie too. The twist at the end, the killer reveal, is done really well. Again, it all plays into that COVID-19-ness, and it might not have been something we could have poked fun at or talked about a couple of years ago, but now that we're past it, I feel like they struck while the iron was hot, and the movie really worked for me. Sick, it's streaming right now. You should definitely check it out. At number 5, guys, we have Saw X. And now Saw X is the 10th movie in the Saw franchise, and I actually did a full Saw series review leading up to Saw X. And so if you want to check out my Saw series review or my Saw ranking video that I did with the one, the only, and the great Alex Label, well, you should check that out. All of those are in a Saw playlist on my channel. But Saw X, I will say that my experience of this movie was tainted because I went to a drive-in. I thought, it's fall, I haven't done a drive-in in a couple years, this will be a good time. It was not. The movie started too early, you could barely see the screen at first. Then you had people turning on their headlights, talking, smoking weed. It was terrible. And I was sitting there in my car like, this was a horrible idea. And then my car started to fog up. You're listening to a little FM radio to hear. It's not the way you should experience movies. We've moved on. Theaters have really perfected the movie-going experience. And so I can tell you right here today that that will be my last drive-in experience. I'm not chancing any more movies on a drive-in. But I did go to the drive-in to see this. That tainted the experience a little bit. But the movie's still at number 5 because I think as a movie in and of itself, it's still a great time. You had John Kramer going on a revenge mission, and he's the last person that you want to have go on a revenge mission against you. He just is. The traps in this movie are cool, although they're not my favorite traps in the franchise. They're still cool to see. It's still fun to get to see new Saw traps. But then you also get the return of Amanda in this movie, and you get very little bit of Detective Hoffman at the end of this movie, and everybody loves Hoffman, so it was just cool to see that as well. Saw X is my number 5 movie, and I really hope that Saw 11 next year is at number 1. At number 4, guys, we have Scream 6, and Scream 6 takes the core 4 that you were introduced to in part 5 and moves them to the Big Apple because all of them are now going to school in New York City, and so where the core 4 goes, so goes Ghostface. So you get Ghostface chasing down the core 4 and members of the previous movies in New York City. And the New York City element of this movie really worked for me. And there were a lot of moments of this movie that really worked for me. Like the opening scene was just awesome. I loved what they did with that opening scene. It was a very unique opening scene for the Ghostface Killer. I liked what they did there. And the movie overall is a good time. It's a very enjoyable time. I mean, I've got it at number 4, so I must have really enjoyed it. But I will admit there are some issues with the movie, especially if you go back and rewatch them. Like with the Ghostface reveal in this movie, I won't spoil it here, but if you see that Ghostface reveal, and then you look at the characters that are now revealed as being Ghostface characters throughout the rest of the movie, there's some things that they do that are just for the viewer's benefit of the movie. And so the first time you're watching it, you may not catch onto it as quickly, but when you get to the end of that movie or you do a rewatch of it, you're just kind of like, wait a minute. That scene was literally just for me, the fan in the audience. That had nothing to do with the rest of the characters. So it's kind of it doesn't make any sense. Like it shouldn't exist is what I'm trying to say. Like that scene shouldn't exist. It's a character doing something to another character, and they're both Ghostface. It doesn't make any sense. But with that said, Scream 6 is still a very enjoyable time. Anytime I get to see Ghostface on screen is awesome. I understand that there's been a ton of controversy around Scream 7, and that might be the last time we see Ghostface for a really long time because, man, have they screwed up this Scream 7. I mean, you have actors that were kicked out of the project for things that they said online. And while I'm not necessarily pro or against what those actors were saying online, I don't think anybody should be fired for what they say online. That's just me personally. And now you get to the point where the director feels threatened by different fans for not speaking up enough for the actors that were let go. And so he walked away from the project completely. You've got Scream 7 that's kind of up in limbo right now. And it's like, what are they going to do with this movie? They're going back to formula. They might be completely rebooting the entire franchise. And we were on a good roll with that core 4. And so it just kind of sucks that that might be the end in Scream 6 of what we knew as the story continuation. But as it stands, Scream 6 is still my number 4 movie. At number 3, there will be no leftovers because it's Thanksgiving, and now we're getting to part 2, so I guess there will be some leftovers. But this is a movie directed by Eli Roth, and I put it so high on this list because I had a great time with it in the theater, but I also had no expectations for this movie. Being an Eli Roth film, I'm not a huge Eli Roth fan. I'm not a big fan of how he portrays gore in his movies or just how far he goes in his movies sometimes. I did not like The Green Inferno at all. And so since he was taking over a movie that has to do a lot with food on a holiday plus a slasher, I was like, this might be like so Eli Roth that it's just, you can't stand it. but actually it was pretty tame for an Eli Roth movie, and it was a really enjoyable slasher movie. Like, there was actually this who is the killer intrigue that they kept all the way to the very end. A lot of people said they spotted it early on, but good for them, because I didn't catch it. And when they gave you the killer reveal at the end, I was legitimately like, oh, good job. I didn't see that one coming. So this worked for me, and I really look forward to Thanksgiving Part 2 next year. All right, guys, we're down to 2 horror movies left to talk about, and at number 2 is Renfield. Renfield stars Nicolas Cage as Dracula, and really I could just stop it right there. It's Nicolas Cage as Dracula. It's number 2. Obviously, let's move on, but I will elaborate a little bit. Nicolas Cage's Dracula in this movie is phenomenal. I love how crazy and zany Nicolas Cage is able to get as Dracula. Like, he's already Nicolas Cage, but now you've made him Dracula, and he does such a good job with that role. The movie focuses a little too much on Awkwafina and a side character for me to put it at number 1, but I really loved this movie. I had a great time with it in the theater, and I showed it down here in my movie theater room to a bunch of friends and family, and they were all dying laughing the whole time. And I was like, oh, this movie has some serious rewatchability. I loved this movie. I had a great time with it. Thought Nicholas Hoult was great as Renfield, and seeing him sort of versus Nicolas Cage's Dracula really worked for me, and I hope down the line we're able to get a Renfield 2. All right, guys, we made it to my number 1 pick of horror movies in 2023, and that would be Talk to Me. Talk to Me feels like a fresh idea, which, if you didn't follow along, is sort of my whole top 10. They're either brand new ideas or they're fresh ideas to a franchise. And again, that's no different for Talk to Me, because it's a fresh idea where these teenagers, young adults play around with this embalmed hand that when you hold it, shake its hand and say, talk to me, it also grips your hand and then lets an entity from the other side possess you. Your eyes turn all black, you get all creepy looking, and this thing is inside you. And as long as they break that handshake within 20 seconds, the thing goes back to where it was and you're no longer possessed. But then one night, of course, as it happens, this girl holds the hand for way too long and something follows through from the other side. So that's the setup for the movie, and it is executed so well. I had a great time with this movie, and then I found out that the guys who shot this movie already shot a prequel movie, and so I'm hoping that comes out in 2024, and I'm hoping that is just a 1-2 punch, and it's right at the top of my horror movies next year. Talk to Me was phenomenal. You know, people again talk about, oh, there's no new concepts, there's no fresh ideas, but here we are, where the top 10 movies on my horror list this year are either fresh ideas to franchises that have been around for a while, or they're brand new concepts, and you just got to check out Talk to Me. You won't be disappointed, I promise. Talk to Me is my number 1 horror movie of 2023. And so, guys, that's my list of horror movies ranked from worst to best in 2023. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it. If you did, don't forget to hit that like button. It helps the video, it helps the channel, and it helps me right here. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Alright, guys, we got to the end of the horror movies ranked from worst to best in 2023, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video. You know, every year I put out a top 10 best and a top 10 worst, but this year I wanted to put out a couple more lists at the end of the year, and so far I've had a really good time doing it. But hey, if you're watching this right away or in the future, I've got all of my 2023 ranked lists right there, and all of my 2023 movie reviews right there.